We usually assume that watching a system makes it better, right? That keeping an eye on things naturally leads to efficiency. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to conduct a clinical examination of the hidden structural forces operating inside complex systems. We're going to uncover how the simple act of observation irreversibly alters reality, and why totally rational, local behavior consistently produces massive, unintended global failures.
So, we build these massive, complex systems, organizations, digital networks, civic infrastructure, and naturally we want to understand how they're running. The incredibly common assumption we all make is that injecting transparency, measurement, or surveillance into a system passively optimizes its performance. We just assume the system is going to continue to operate completely normally, just with better visibility for us.
But here's the thing. It doesn't. Transparency actually alters the system. The exact moment a system is observed, it changes. The measurement itself stops being a passive window and becomes this entirely new structural force, driving behaviors that completely contradict whatever the intended outcome was in the first place.
To really understand this hidden structural force, let's look at a totally persistent physical system. Just imagine a simple gravity chute, right? Used to slide objects from point A down to point B. Now, we go in and install a basic mechanical counter flap halfway down the chute, purely to record the objects passing through. The whole idea is that this flap is an entirely passive, transparent observer.
Now let's pull back and look at the real world. Consider the 350 million surveillance cameras estimated to be operating globally right now. Modern institutions scale up this kind of observation exactly like our mechanical flap. They desperately seek data, assuming those millions of cameras are simply recording the unvarnished truth of human movement. But they haven't yet accounted for the structural consequences of that observation. Because when human behavior actually intersects with observation, the system destabilizes. Just look at the famous 1920s illumination experiments at the Hawthorne Works factory. Researchers went in and changed the lighting to see if it improved worker output. But the output changed strictly as a response to being monitored. It literally didn't matter if the lights were brighter or dimmer. The mere act of measuring became the primary variable driving the change.
Back inside our physical gravity chute, that little flap is supposed to just observe. But its mere presence physically alters the environment. It pushes back. It adds actual physical friction. Suddenly, the velocity and flow of the objects sliding down are absolutely no longer what they were in their unobserved state.
This happens because when you add measurement, rational actors are going to locally optimize for that specific metric, completely ignoring the intended systemic goal. During French colonial rule in Hanoi, officials placed a bounty on rats to clean up the city. To claim it, people just had to bring in severed rat tails. So what was the logical result? Catchers severed the tails and released the rats alive so they could breed more. Or take Fort Benning, Georgia, where a $40 bounty for feral pigtails led to hunters actively feeding the pigs to breed trophy-sized males. The structural response perfectly optimized the metric while actively worsening the actual problem. And because the flap in our chute presents a brand new physical constraint, the objects themselves must now adapt. They literally have to conform to its specific resistance just to pass through. Think about that. The entire flow of the chute is now being dictated by the mechanism of observation.
In reality, this adaptation rapidly escalates into deep structural fragility. Take the Northern Irish Renewable Heat Incentive. The goal was noble: subsidize renewable heating. But the subsidy margin was legally structured so that the energy payout was actually greater than its cost. So what was the rational, local behavior? Businesses started burning massive amounts of fuel in completely empty buildings just to profit from the subsidy margin. The system structurally incentivized maximum waste. And the consequences escalate to a truly disturbing level when human lives become the metric. Consider the Medicare system in the United States, which reimburses medical professionals based on the volume of treatments administered. That structure rewarded a single Detroit area doctor with $17.6 million in payouts for administering completely unnecessary cancer treatments to patients. When a system structurally rewards treatment rather than prevention, the optimal local behavior is to maximize unnecessary treatment. So as we escalate the constraint in our chute, the objects aren't just passively sliding through anymore. Now, they are being deliberately broken into smaller, heavier pieces strictly to register more counts on that mechanical flap. The system is fundamentally no longer moving objects. It is exclusively manufacturing clicks.
Which brilliantly illustrates a fascinating and kind of tragic historical parallel. Back in the 20th century, the paleontologist von Koningswald was on an expedition in Java. He decided to pay locals for each hominin skull fragment they found. So what was the rational local behavior? The locals deliberately smashed and tacked priceless whole skulls into tiny fragments just to secure the maximum payout per piece.
Now that we've hit peak tension and seen this pattern of irrational optimization play out over and over, we can actually give this structural trap a clinical diagnosis. It's called a perverse incentive. It guarantees, literally guarantees, that an incentive structure will produce undesirable results completely contrary to its initial design. And make no mistake, this structural mechanism scales globally. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change instituted a scheme that rewarded carbon credits for destroying greenhouse gases, specifically a highly damaging byproduct called HFC 23. Well, the structural reward was so incredibly lucrative that chemical companies intentionally overproduced the harmful gas simply to collect millions in credits for destroying it. The policy fundamentally, structurally, rewarded the manufacturing of pollutants. We see this exact, inescapable logic again with Afghan poppy farming. Officials offered a $700 per acre bounty to farmers simply for destroying their poppy crops. So, structurally, this incentivized a massive poppy growing frenzy. Farmers planted as many poppies as humanly possible simply to harvest the destruction payouts. The transparency and the measurement directly engineered the massive expansion of the problem.
Which brings our physical system to its final, irreversible state. The chute is now entirely jammed. It is packed full of shattered fragments optimized solely to trigger the mechanical flap. Nothing actually passes through anymore. The attempt to measure the flow has created total physical lock-in.
Escaping this trap becomes utterly impossible because the transparency mechanism is no longer observing the system. The measurement has replaced the architecture. The metrics, the surveillance, the bounties, they have literally become the foundational architecture of the system itself. There is absolutely no unobserved system left to return to.
Ultimately, we have to completely reframe our understanding of these failures. Look at the intended goals versus the actual structural outputs. The truth is, the systems never actually failed. The rat bounties, the carbon credits, the healthcare payouts, they functioned flawlessly according to their structures. They rewarded exactly what they were designed to measure. So I'll leave you with this to consider. What hidden metrics are currently acting as the foundational architecture of your world?